ASMR, back with another video. In this video, we're going to be learning about the bacteria called Salmonella. So, Salmonella is a bacterial genus that consists of several species, and we'll go over all of them. And we'll utilize one of the images provided by Sketchy to help us better understand each of the principles associated with the Salmonella. So, the image title is Salmon Dinner, as we see over here. And then, some of the general features you have to know is that Salmonella is a gram-negative rod bacteria. It is an Enterobacteriaceae. It is non-lactose. They are non-lactose fermenters. They have motile flagella. So think about the salmon tail flapping over here. And they produce the H2S, which produces black colonies on the hecto and agar. They are also encapsulated, and they are acid labile, or able to be destroyed in an acidic condition. So again, remember they're motile flagella. They have motile flagella, non-lactose fermenters, gram-negative rods, produce H2S, produce black colonies on hecto and agar. So think about the black plate over here. And then they're encapsulated. So think about the glass case over here over the salmon. And they're acid labile. So think about the lemons next to the salmon to help you remember that they're acid labile. So now let's talk about the Salmonella typhi, or the Salmonella enterica subtype typhi. So the Salmonella typhi has the V capsule, or the VI capsule. It is a facultative anaerobe. And then its reservoir, it can be only found in humans, so it's not typically found in animals. For transmission, it is transmitted through the fecal to the oral route from the human carriers, and then it will enter the gallbladder. So to remember this, think about the seagull wearing an apron to indicate Mary, the chef who caused a typhoid outbreak. So here we have a seagull wearing the apron that supposedly caused a typhoid outbreak. And then, once it enters the gallbladder, there's going to be decreased stomach acid, or actually, some of the things that predispose an individual to salmonella infections include decreased stomach acid, or impairment of mononuclear cells, such as in cases of sickle cell disease. And then the decreased stomach acid makes sense because salmonella is acid labile. So with decreased acid production, more salmonella can survive. So remember that. For pathogenesis and disease, the classic well-known pathogenesis and disease is the typhoid or the enteric fever. And there can be a milder form of the paratyphoid fever caused by the species Salmonella paratyphi. Anyways, the typhoid or enteric fever involves the following pathogenesis. So, the large quantity of organism is ingested, and then the infection will begin in the ileocecal region, and then the salmonella will reach the basolateral side of the M cells in the intestine, and then it will travel through the mesenteric lymph nodes and eventually the bloodstream. This is known as transient primary septicemia once it enters the blood. And then at week 1, the patients will have 80% positive blood cultures, and then 25% of the patients may have rose spots on the trunk and the abdomen. So macrophages with the omega that are open, as shown over here, and the cage door is open over here. I think that's the letter omega, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. So feel free to double check on that. But the idea is that the Salmonella typhi survives intracellularly and replicates in the macrophages. And then they are resistant to macrophage killing, and this is due to the decreased fusion of the lysosomes with the phagosomes, and then also the defensins. This thing called the defensins will allow the Salmonella to withstand oxygen-dependent and oxygen-independent killing. And so afterwards, it is released from the macrophage, and the V capsular antigen will withstand complement-mediated killing. So the main takeaway is that Salmonella typhi can survive for quite a while by dwelling in the intracellular part of the macrophages and then replicating within them. And then also, the biliary system is infected, and the organisms enter the intestinal tract in the bile. And then by week 3, the 85% of stool cultures are positive. So if that happens, the symptoms can include fever, headache, abdominal pain, and constipation, which can then lead to pea soup diarrhea. To remember this, think about the green bird droppings that we should see over here from the seagull over here. So here's the green bird droppings, reminding you of the pea soup diarrhea. And then complications for this is that if the patient is left untreated, it can lead to necrosis of the pyre patches and along the intestinal walls with perforation, thrombophlebitis. Let me fix that for the time being. I should say perforation, I believe. Anyways, yeah, so it can lead to perforation, thrombophlebitis, cholecystitis, pneumonia, abscess formation, and some other complications. And that's when the biliary system is infected by the Salmonella, and when the patient is left untreated, which then leads to necrosis of pyre patches. So for treatment, when it comes to Salmonella typhi infection, we would most likely use fluoroquinolones. Like, one example of it is ciprofloxacin. And so, to remember this, think about the flower in the vase, as shown over here. Or we could also utilize like a third generation cephalosporin. And then for prevention, sanitation is the most important thing, especially hand washing and proper sanitation of food items. But anyways, there are 3 vaccines available. First, we have the attenuated oral vaccine of the TY21A strain. And then we have the parenteral heat-killed. And then a parenteral VICPS polysaccharide capsular vaccine. So, to remember the attenuated oral vaccine of TY21A strain, or just any vaccine methods for Salmonella typhi prevention, just think about the syringe, as shown over here. So again, the 3 options are oral vaccine of TY21A strain, the parenteral heat-killed form, or the parenteral VICPS polysaccharide capsular vaccine. And then we have the Salmonella enteritis. special about Salmonella enteritis is that it has antibodies, or the antibodies to the O, the VI, and the H antigens in the serum can be detected through the agglutination method. This is known as the Widal test. And then the reservoir, this bacteria can be found in the enteric tracts of humans and animals, such as chickens and turtles. And then the transmission is largely through chicken products or reptile pets. So be sure to cook your chicken thoroughly. Anyways, the pathogenesis is involving some major invasion that leads to inflammatory diarrhea. So, to remember the invasive property of Salmonella enteritis that can lead to inflammatory diarrhea, think about the chicken lighting the candle over here. So specifically, it's going to invade the mucosa in the ileocecal region, and it becomes invasive to the lamina propria, which then leads to inflammation, and then increased prostaglandin secretion, and then increased cyclic AMP production, which then leads to loose diarrhea formation. And that is how the inflammatory diarrhea propagates from Salmonella enteritis infection. And so, for diseases, the most common ones include the enterocolitis and the gastroenteritis. And then the second most common, or technically the Salmonella enteritis is the second most common bacterial cause of the enterocolitis or the gastroenteritis after the Campylobacter jejuni. So, when this happens, about 6 to 48 hours of incubation, there can be nausea, vomiting, and only occasionally bloody loose stools, fever, abdominal pain, myalgia, and headache. And so remember that the incubation period is anywhere between 6 to 48 hours. And the common symptoms include nausea, vomiting, only occasionally bloody loose stools, fever, abdominal pain, myalgia, and headache. And then for the virulence factor, they will produce type 3 secretion factor that detects eukaryotic cells and secretes protein that helps with infectivity. To remember this, think about the turkey baster. And then for treatment, this form of infection is usually self-limiting, and antibiotics in this case would be contraindicated. Instead, the proper prevention method is to properly cook foods and wash hands. So be sure to cook your chickens thoroughly. And then we have some other species like Salmonella, choleraceus, paratyphi, enterica, and Dublin. These can also lead to septicemia. But the Salmonella typhi still leads to the most severe form of septicemia. And then endocarditis or arthritis can complicate about 10% of cases involving Salmonella infection. So just be aware of that possibility. And then Salmonella is the most common causal agent of osteomyelitis in sickle cell disease patients.